We made straight for the lake. It was so named at the estate, and I must say, quite justly so, though now it seems to me the expanse of water was not nearly as vast as it appeared to my untrained eye then. My acquaintance with watery expanses had been very slight, and the lake at Bly, at least on those rare occasions when I ventured, under the protection of my charges, to sail upon it in the old flat-bottomed boat kept for us at the landing, invariably struck me with its breadth and its dark, shifting surface. The usual landing place was half a mile from the house, but I was firmly convinced, wherever Flora might be hiding, it certainly was not near the dwelling. She had slipped away not for some empty prank. After all that passed between us, I had long since noticed where she was drawn during her walks. That is why I resolutely suggested to Mrs. Groose that she follow me, and when she understood our route and tried to restrain me, I saw utter consternation in her eyes. "Are you going to the lake, miss? You think she—" "Perhaps, though it's not deep there. But I think she has rather gone to that place from which we saw, that time, what I told you about." When she pretended not to notice anything. Precisely. And with such astonishing composure. I thought she would want to go back there alone. So her brother helped her. Mrs. Groose still stood motionless. "Do you believe they speak of it amongst themselves?" I replied without a shadow of doubt. "They speak of such things that you and I would feel faint if we heard but a single word. But if Flora is there, then what? Then Miss Jessel is there too?" "Without a doubt. You shall see for yourself." "No, thank you," exclaimed Mrs. Groose, and seeing her as if rooted to the spot, I quickly strode forward alone. However, as soon as I drew near the lake, it turned out she was following close on my heels. Apparently, whatever horrors she might have imagined, she was still less afraid in my company. She sighed with relief when a large portion of the lake opened up before us, and the girl was nowhere to be seen. She was not on the nearer shore, where I had once observed her with such astonishment, nor on the opposite side, where a thick growth of shrubs came right down to the water's edge, leaving only a narrow strip of sand. The lake, oblong in shape, was not wide, and from the spot where its farther end was lost from view, it might have been taken for a shallow river. We gazed in silence at the deserted expanse, and from my companion's look I easily guessed her apprehensions. Knowing what she was thinking, I merely shook my head in negation. No, wait. She took the boat." My companion glanced at the empty landing, then shifted her gaze to the far shore. "But where is she, then?" "That we don't see her is the surest proof. She crossed to the other side, and then managed to hide the boat. All alone, such a little thing." "She is not alone, and at such moments she is no longer a child. She is a very old woman." I was carefully scanning both shores as far as the eye could reach, while Mrs. Groose, with a sudden submissiveness, was sinking into that alien element she had learned of only from me. Then I indicated to her that the boat might be concealed in one of the little inlets, hidden from us by a jut of the bank and a shade of trees growing close to the water. "But if the boat's there, where is the girl?" my companion anxiously asked. "That is exactly what we are to find out." And I started forward. "We're going all the way round the lake, without fail, however far it may be. It will take us about 10 minutes, but for the little girl that distance too is considerable." So she crossed directly. "Lord help us!" broke from my friend once more. The heavy weight of my logic was too much for her, yet it still drew her after me. When we had half encircled the lake along the fatiguing, uneven path, a trail lost in thickets, amid gullies and hillocks, I stopped to let her rest. I supported her with a grateful hand, assuring her that she was of great help to me, Having caught our breath, we set off again and in a few minutes reached the spot where, as I had supposed, the boat lay. It had been deliberately pushed in deep to be out of sight and was tied to one of the posts of a fence that here descended right to the shore, facilitating disembarkation. Looking at the pair of short, clumsy oars, considerately raised, I reflected what an incredible feat this was for a small girl. But by then I had lived too long among marvels and had seen the most adroit tricks performed. There was a gate in the fence. We passed through it and, after a few steps, found ourselves in an open space. And then we both cried out at once. There she is. Flora stood a little way off in the grass and smiled at us as if she had just completed her performance. Yet she immediately bent down and plucked, as if that were her sole purpose, a large, ugly branch of dried fern. I was sure she had just emerged from the copse. She waited for us without taking a step, and I felt with what ominous solemnity we were now approaching her. She kept on smiling and smiling, and then we were upon her. But all this happened in a silence that grew more oppressive with every second. Mrs. Groose was the first to break the spell. She dropped to her knees and, clasping the child to her breast, held the soft, pliant little body in a long embrace. While this affecting scene lasted, I could only watch, and watch all the more intently when I saw Flora's little face peep at me over our friend's shoulder. It was serious now, all its animation gone, but this only heightened the agonizing envy I felt for the simplicity of Mrs. Groose's relations. Not a word had been spoken between us all this time. Only Flora tossed her absurd fern branch to the ground. In essence, Flora and I had silently given each other to understand that resorting to any pretext was now pointless. When Mrs. Groose finally rose, still holding the girl's hand, they both stood before me, and the strange muteness of our communion was particularly underscored by the frank, almost defiant look Flora cast at me. They may hang me before I utter a word. That look said to me, having scanned me from head to foot with feigned astonishment, Flora was the first to speak. Our bare heads seemed to surprise her. But where are your hats? And where is yours, my dear? I briskly rejoined. Her usual cheerfulness had already returned to her, and she apparently deemed this a sufficient answer. And where's Miles? She continued. Something in this seemingly insignificant question finally felled me. Those 3 words flashed like a naked blade, and the cup I had held in trembling hands for week upon week was overturned. Before I could utter a word, I felt the long-restrained storm breaking over me. I'll tell you if you'll tell me. My own voice sounded, and I immediately heard it falter. What? Mrs. Groose's anguished bewilderment clearly warned me, but it was too late now, and I said quietly yet distinctly, "Where, my pet, is Miss Jessel?" Everything was instantly made clear, just as it had been that time in the churchyard with Miles. However significant it had seemed to me that until now this name had not been uttered between us, the child's swift, guilty look in response to the broken silence echoed like the crash of a shattered window. This was joined by a cry, torn the same instant from Mrs. Groose, appalled by my cruelty, the cry of a frightened, wounded animal trying to ward off a blow. It all culminated in my own groan. I seized my companion by the arm. "She's there she is." Miss Jessel stood before us on the opposite shore, exactly as she had the last time, and, frightful to recall, my first feeling in that moment was a burning joy that proof. Here it was undeniable. She is here, and in this lies my vindication. She is here, and I am not cruel, not mad. She is here, and poor, terrified Mrs. Groose sees her But most importantly, Flora sees her. In those terrible minutes, perhaps the most extraordinary was when I mentally sent her a silent gratitude, feeling that even this pale, rapacious demon would accept and understand it. She stood on the very spot where we had just been with my companion, and all the malevolence emanating from her reached us in its full force. This sharp, piercing awareness lasted several seconds, until, by Mrs. Groose's stunned gaze, which darted to where I was pointing, I was convinced that at last she saw her too. Then I hastily turned my eyes to Flora. The way Flora reacted struck me, and, to tell the truth, far more profoundly than if I had seen mere distress in her. I certainly had not expected outright fright. Ever since we had found her, she had already had time to prepare herself, to be on guard, striving to betray nothing. Therefore, that which I had not even conceived of, and which was revealed at first glance, truly shook me. To see her, without a trace of embarrassment on her pink little face, without any pretense, without even once looking at the apparition I was pointing to, merely gazing at me with a firm, calm severity, but with such an unprecedented, utterly new expression, as if she were reading my thoughts, accusing and passing judgment upon me. This was a blow. This seemed to transform the girl into the very phantasm from which I recoiled. I recoiled, but never had I been so firmly convinced that she saw. And, feeling I must not yield, I desperately called upon her as a witness. She is here, you unhappy child. Here, here, and you see her as clearly as you see me. Not long before, I had told Mrs. Groose that at such moments Flora was not a child, but a very old woman. And no more striking confirmation of my words could have been conceived than when she, instead of answering, merely turned her face to me and, without confirming anything, without agreeing to anything, with a single look made me feel her deep, mounting, and finally utterly irrefutable condemnation. At that moment, if I am even capable of piecing it all together, what shook me most was precisely this manner of hers. But then Mrs. Groose fell upon me. And with what force? I don't know how it happened, but suddenly it was as if a cloud had come over my companion's mind, and, all aflame, she assailed me with loud indignation. "What monstrous nonsense is this, miss? Where on earth do you see anything here?" I could only put my arms about her shoulders, for at the very moment she was speaking, the repulsively distinct vision stood before us, brazen and exposed. A minute passed, then another, while I, clasping my friend, tried to make her turn her head to look carefully and persistently pointed my finger. "But how can you not see her when we do? Do you mean to say you don't see her even now? Even now? Why, she's as plain as a blazing fire. Only look, dear, look." She looked just as I did, and her heavy groans expressed denial, disgust, pity. She seemed both to commiserate me and to be glad she could support me, which even touched me, and yet at the same time to feel relief at being free of it herself. And I so needed support, because with this blow that had fallen upon me, her eyes being by some enchantment forbidden to see, I felt the ground giving way beneath me. I saw, I knew, how my terrible predecessor was already supplanting me, and I clearly foresaw how things would now turn after Flora's astonishing behavior. And here Mrs. Groose immediately intervened with vehemence. Panting, she soothed Flora with such force that even in my downfall I secretly felt a thrill of triumph. "She isn't there, my little dear, and there's nobody there, and you never saw a thing, my pet. Poor Miss Jessel? Why, how can that be when poor Miss Jessel is dead and buried? We know that, don't we, darling? she cried, her words tangling as she appealed to the child. It's all just a mistake, a bit of fun that's gone far enough. And now let's get home quick. Our charge responded at once with a kind of uncanny primness. Mrs. Groose straightened up, and now they stood side by side, as if in a forced conspiracy against me. Flora continued to look at me with the same fixed stare of cold condemnation, and I, even as she stood there clutching our friend's dress, prayed God to forgive me for not being able to help sing. All her incomparable childish beauty had vanished at a stroke. She had become revolting, hard, coarse, and almost ugly. I don't know what you mean. I see nobody. I see nothing. And I never have. I think you're cruel. I don't like you. And after this outburst, such as one might expect only from a brazen street child, she hugged Mrs. Groose still tighter and buried her dreadful little face in her skirts. And, burying it, she shrieked with a frantic voice, "Take me away! Take me away from her!" "From me?" I gasped. From you," she cried. Even Mrs. Groose cast a horrified glance at me. There was nothing left for me but to turn once more to that figure on the shore, which, motionless as if arrested, seemed to catch our voices across the distance, and was there so plainly for my ruin, not my support. The unhappy child spoke as if some on the other side were prompting her every fatal word, and in complete despair at all I had to bear, I could only shake my head sadly. If I had any doubt till now, it is all gone. I have lived with a monstrous truth, and now it has nearly drawn me into its circle. Yes, I have lost you. I interfered, and you have, at her dictation, found the infallibly easy way out. And here I looked into the face of our hellish witness across the lake. I did what I could, but I have lost you. Goodbye. To Mrs. Groose I only said abruptly, almost fiercely, "Go, go." And in deep distress, she silently clasped the child, and with all the haste she could muster went back the way we had come, clearly convinced, despite her blindness, that something terrible had happened, that we were in trouble. What followed when I was left alone, I remember confusedly. I only know that what seemed no more than a quarter of an hour later, absorbed in my grief, I suddenly felt the chill damp penetrating me and realized I must have flung myself in despair on the ground and was lying with my face in the sand. I must have lain there a good while, sobbing and weeping, for when I raised my head the day was waning. I got up and for a moment gazed in the twilight at the gray lake and its empty, haunted shore, and then I set off for home. My journey was arduous and melancholy. When I reached the gate in the fence, I discovered with surprise that the boat was gone, which made me reflect on Flora's extraordinary composure. That night, by a tacit and, I might say, happy agreement, if that didn't sound so false, she spent with Mrs. Groose. Upon returning, I saw neither of them, but as a compensation, though a dubious one, I had my fill of looking at Miles. I looked my fill at him. I can find no other word. More than ever before. No evening I had spent at Bly took on so sinister a character as that one. Yet despite it, despite the abyss of horror that had opened at my feet, there was an extraordinary, sweet sadness in that closing day. When I came home, I didn't even ask where the boy was. I went straight to my room to change, and at once, with a single glance, saw plain proof that my connection with Flora was severed. All her belongings had been removed from the room. Later, when I was sitting by the fire in the schoolroom and the maid brought me tea, I forbore to ask about my other pupil. He had gotten his wish, his freedom. Let him enjoy it to the full. And he did enjoy it, which was shown, at least in part, when about 8 o'clock he came into the schoolroom and silently sat down beside me. After the tea tray had been removed, I blew out the candles and drew my chair closer to the fire. I felt a deadly chill and thought I should never be warm again. So when Miles appeared, I was sitting by the fire deep in thought. For a moment he paused in the doorway, as if observing me. Then, as if to share these thoughts with me, came and sank into the chair on the other side of the hearth. We sat together in perfect silence, but I felt he wished to be with me. Scarcely had the new day dawned when I opened my eyes and saw Mrs. Groose approach my bed with bad news. Flora was shivering so violently that it seemed she was seriously ill. The night had been one of anxiety, the girl tormented by fears, and what she feared was connected not with the former governess, but precisely with the present one. She did not resist the possible appearance of Miss Jessel, but fiercely and openly refused to see me any longer. Naturally, I rose from my bed at once and began to question her, especially as my friend, it seemed, had already prepared herself for a difficult conversation. I sensed this as soon as I asked, "So whom do you believe more, the child or me?" Then she persists in denying that she saw anything, insists she never noticed anything. My visitor was clearly troubled. "Ah, miss, it's not the sort of matter to lead her thoughts that way. And, to tell the truth, I see no need for it. She is visibly aging before our eyes from all this. Oh, I see that myself. She is outraged. Just think, such a noble girl, and she's suspected of lying, insulted, invented some Miss Jessel, playing the role of innocence, the little wretch. I assure you, the impression she made on me yesterday was something utterly incredible, unlike anything, and I have decided once and for all, there can be no more conversation between us. However monstrous and incomprehensible all this was to Mrs. Groose, she fell silent at once, and agreed with me with such readiness that it was clear something more lay behind it. To be honest, miss, I think she doesn't want it herself. She speaks so very haughtily. That haughtiness is precisely the point, I concluded. Oh yes, looking at my visitor's face, I clearly pictured both her appearance and much else. She keeps asking whether you will come. I understand. I myself did everything to make it burst forth in her. And did she, after yesterday, utter a single word about Miss Jessel, besides saying she knows nothing of her? Not a single one, miss. And you know yourself, she added. I understood from her words, even at the lake, that there had been no one there. Is that so? And you still believe it? I don't argue with her. What else can I do? Exactly nothing. You have to deal with such a clever one. I mean those two, their friends, have made them unparalleled schemers. That's what they are playing on. Now Flora has something to complain of, and she will carry it through to the end. Yes, miss, but what end? Well, she will complain of me to her uncle, portray me as an outright villainess. From the expression on Mrs. Groose's face, I vividly pictured the scene, and my heart tightened. She looked as if she could see them both. And yet he has such a high opinion of you. Still, it's odd, I smiled faintly, that he has chosen just such a way to show it. But no matter. Flora only wants to be rid of me. My companion honestly confirmed. To never see you again. So you've come to hasten my departure? I asked, but without letting her answer, I stopped her. This is what occurred to me, and I think it would be better. I thought I ought to leave, and on Sunday I was almost resolved to do so. But no, you must leave, and take Flora with you. My friend pondered. But where should we? Away from here. Away from them. And most importantly, away from me. Straight to her uncle. Only to complain of you? No, not only that, but also to leave me alone with my remedy. She still hesitated. And what is your remedy? First and foremost, your loyalty. And also Miles. She stared at me. Do you think he will take the opportunity to renounce me? Yes, I admit that too. But still, I want to risk it to try. Leave with his sister as soon as possible and leave me alone with him. I myself was surprised at how much courage I still retained, and so was somewhat taken aback when she, despite this, continued to hesitate. And one more thing, I continued. Of course, before her departure, they must on no account see each other. Not for a minute. And here it occurred to me that perhaps we were already too late, despite Flora having been kept locked up ever since returning from the lake. You don't think they have already met? I asked anxiously. She flushed. Oh, miss, I'm not such a witless fool. If she had to be left alone 2 or 3 times, it was always with one of the maids. And now, though she is alone, I have locked her in. And still, there was too much to fear. What exactly? Well, and are you so sure of the little gentleman? I'm sure of no one but you. But since last evening, I have had hope. It seems to me he wants to draw me into a confidence. I believe it. My poor, horrid, lovely boy. He longs to speak out. Last evening we sat in silence by the fire for a full 2 hours, and I kept thinking, he's about to speak. Mrs. Groose stared intently out the window at the gloomy dawn. Well, and did he speak? No. I waited and waited and waited in vain. So, without breaking the silence, without even mentioning his sister or her absence, he kissed me, and we parted. But all the same, I went on, if she sees her uncle, I cannot allow the uncle to see her brother. Matters have taken such a turn that the boy needs a little more time. It was this that my friend most resisted. I did not quite understand why. How long, in your opinion, is a little time? Well, a day or 2, for everything to be revealed. Then he will be on my side. You understand how important that is. If not, I will only lose, and you will at least help me somewhat by doing all you can in town. I was explaining this to her, but she remained in a kind of inexplicable confusion. I decided to help. But perhaps you don't want to go at all? And then, from her face, I understood everything. It suddenly cleared, and she stretched out her hand to me in agreement. I'll go. I'll go this very morning. I want to be fair. If you think it's better to wait, I promise she won't see me. No, that's just the point. She needs to leave this place. For a moment she looked at me somberly, then finished. You judged rightly, miss. On myself, you see. Yes. I cannot stay here either. And as she looked at me, a new thought came to me. You mean that since yesterday you saw? She shook her head slowly, with dignity. I heard all manner of horrors from that girl. There, she sighed with tragic relief. Upon my word, miss, the things she says. But at this memory, her strength failed her. Bursting into sobs, she sank onto my sofa and gave vent to her grief, as had happened before. I, too, gave vent to my feelings, but in my own way. Oh, thank God! She sprang up, wiping her eyes, and groaned. Thank God! But it justifies me. That's true, miss. It does justify you. It was said so expressively that it seemed one could desire nothing more. But I still hesitated. Something terrible. I saw my friend was at a loss for words. Monstrous. About me? About you, miss, if you must know. And for a young lady, something incredible. I don't know where she could have picked up such words to call me. I know where. I said, laughing. My laugh was eloquent enough. And, to tell the truth, it only perplexed my companion more. So perhaps I ought to know as well, for I've heard somewhat the same from her before. But I can't bear it, uttered the poor woman, and casting a glance at my watch, she hurried. Well, I must be going. But I detained her. Oh, if you cannot bear it, how can I stay with her, you mean? Only take her away from here. Away from all this, far from them. She continued. She might change. Be rid of it. I almost joyfully embraced her. So, despite yesterday, you believe in such things? From the expression on her face, as she named it so simply, I understood. No more questions were needed. Everything became clearer than ever when she answered. I do believe. Yes, it was a joy. There were two of us shoulder to shoulder. If I could be sure of that, I was no longer afraid of the future. In the face of calamity, I had support, the very one that had been my prop when I so needed trust. And if my friend would vouch for my honesty, I was ready to vouch for all the rest. Already saying goodbye, I added in some confusion. Yes, there's one more thing. My letter, with that dreadful piece of news, will arrive before you reach town. And I saw even more clearly how she was trying to evade it all, how weary she was of pretense. Your letter won't get there. It was never sent. What happened to it? God knows. Mr. Miles, you think he took it? I exclaimed in astonishment. She hesitated, but mastered herself. Yes. Yesterday, when we returned with Miss Flora, I noticed the letter was gone from the table. Later I asked Luke. He said he hadn't seen or touched it. We exchanged conjectures, and Mrs. Groose was the first to sum it up with an almost triumphant air. There, you see. Yes, I see. If Miles took the letter, he certainly read it and destroyed it. And you see nothing more? I looked at her silently with a sad smile. It seems to me that since your eyes have been opened, you see more than I do. And so it was, she said, blushing a little. Now I see what he used to do at school. And with artless directness, with almost comical disappointment, she nodded. He stole. I pondered, striving to be impartial. Well, quite possibly. My calmness seemed to amaze her. Stole letters. She could not know what accounted for this outward composure, and I excused it as best I could. I suppose he had more meaningful purposes for it. In a letter I left on the table yesterday, there was nothing to make capital of, only a request for an interview. He is probably already ashamed of having gone so far for so little. That's what weighed on him last evening. He wanted to confess. At that moment, I felt I understood everything and held all the threads. Go, leave us, I said at the door, seeing Mrs. Groose off. I'll draw it out of him. He won't resist. He'll confess. And if he confesses, he is saved. And if he is saved, then you are too. The dear woman kissed me, and we parted. I'll save you without him, she cried to me in farewell. But when at last he appeared and I saw that charming face on which the events had left no shadow, everything I had planned seemed insurmountably difficult. I did not know how to approach him. To show the household that I was equal to the situation, I had once and for all ordered that the boy and I should dine in the dining room, or as we called it, downstairs, and I now awaited him before the window where, on the first Sunday after my arrival, that had been revealed to me, which had only flickered vaguely in Mrs. Groose's discourse. And here, seized anew by a familiar feeling, one that had visited me more than once, I understood. My peace of mind depended entirely on whether I had the fortitude to close my eyes to the truth that everything I had to deal with was vile and unnatural. Only by relying on nature, by trusting to it, could one undertake this terrible trial as a dreadful wrench in a direction contrary to nature. Difficult, of course, but in the end requiring for the contest on equal terms only another sharp turn of the screw to set right the dislocation inherent in man's nature. Yet no attempt demanded greater tact than this. the attempt to substitute myself for all that was natural around us. How could I infuse even a grain of naturalness into our silence about what had happened? But how, on the other hand, could I touch upon it without plunging back into the monstrous darkness? After a time, I found a kind of way out, and it seemed to be received approvingly, for my little companion showed a perceptiveness rare in him, as if even now, as had often happened during lessons, he had found a tactful way to assist me. Had it not become clear, now that we were alone, and clearer than ever, that under such exceptionally favorable circumstances it was absurd to refuse the help that complete mutual understanding could give? For what reason was intelligence given to him, if not to save himself? Could one not somehow reach his understanding through this dislocation of nature, set it right, turn it back? When we were left face to face in the dining room, he seemed himself to urge me along this path. The roast lamb was served, and I dismissed the servants. Miles, before taking his seat, stood for a minute with his hands in his pockets, looking at the leg of lamb, as if on the verge of making a joke. But instead he said, "I say, my dear, is she really so very ill? Little Flora? No, nothing serious. She'll soon be better. London will help her recover. Bly has become harmful to her. Sit down, have some lamb." He obeyed at once, carefully helped himself to the roast, and, having taken his seat, continued, "How did it happen all of a sudden that Bly became harmful to her?" "Not quite all of a sudden, I think. We noticed she wasn't well. Then why didn't you send her away sooner?" "Sooner than what?" "Sooner than before she became quite ill." I quickly collected myself. "She isn't so ill that she couldn't be taken away, but she might have become quite ill if she'd stayed. It was necessary to catch the illness in time. The journey will weaken its influence. Oh, I spoke with great seriousness, and do away with it altogether." I see. Miles, too, was serious. He set about his dinner with that charming table manner which from the day of his return from school had spared me any need for correction. Whatever he had been expelled for, it was not for slovenly eating. Today, as always, his bearing was impeccable, but noticeably more guarded. He clearly wanted to take for granted far more than he understood or could manage without help, and he sank into a friendly silence, feeling his way. Our meal was brief. I only pretended to eat and gave orders for the table to be cleared immediately. While it was being cleared, Miles stood with his hands in his pockets again and his back to me, stood looking out the broad window where not long before I had seen that which had so shaken me. We remained silent while the maid was present. Somehow it reminded me of how newlyweds fall silent during their honeymoon in a hotel, embarrassed before the waiter. Miles turned to me only when we were alone. "Well, here we are alone." However, no sooner had she departed, and I missed her at once, than I found myself in an extremely difficult position. If I had counted on gaining anything by being left alone with Miles, it immediately became clear that I had overestimated my strength. Never in all my time here had I felt such anxious apprehensions as in that moment when, having descended, I learned that the carriage with Mrs. Groose and my younger charge had already passed through the gates. Now, I said to myself, I am left face to face with the elements, and all that day, struggling against weakness, I could only think how I could have been so rash. My situation proved far more arduous than I had previously imagined, especially as everyone in the house wore an expression that spoke of disaster. They were all, of course, astonished. Whatever excuses we might have given, my friend's sudden departure seemed inexplicable. The maids and servants went about with bewildered faces, and this so grated on my nerves that matters only worsened until I resolved. This was precisely what I must use to help myself. In short, I avoided utter collapse only by taking the reins firmly into my own hands. I can say that on that morning, when I steel myself to do so, I maintained an authoritative and stern manner purely to avoid breaking down. It was important to me that everyone should see. Left to my own devices, I retained a remarkable firmness of spirit. With this air, I paced the house for a couple of hours, and my face plainly showed a readiness to repel any assault. Thus, for all whom it concerned, I busily walked to and fro, while in my soul there reigned desolation. The person whom this seemed to concern least of all was little Miles himself, at least until luncheon. During my rounds of the estate, he never once crossed my path, but this only confirmed how our relations had changed after he had so deftly duped me at the piano the previous day for Flora's sake. And Flora's subsequent seclusion and her departure had made this change obvious to all. Indeed, we ourselves now confirmed what had occurred by breaking the custom of morning lessons in the schoolroom. Miles was already gone when, descending, I glanced into his room in passing, and downstairs I was informed that he had already breakfasted with Mrs. Groose and his sister in the presence of 2 housemaids. He had said he was going for a walk, and I thought that with this he could not have more frankly let me know that a drastic change had taken place in my duties. What these duties would now consist of, this, it seemed, we had yet to determine. At any rate, I felt a strange relief, chiefly on my own account, that we had at least ceased pretending in this regard. If so much had been revealed, I can say without exaggeration that nothing was clearer than the absurdity of continuing to pretend I could teach him anything. To all his little silent evasions, when he even strove more than I to prevent me from losing dignity, I could only appeal to him to be with me as his true self, as he was by nature. In any case, he was now granted complete freedom. I no longer encroached upon it, and the clearest proof of this was that the previous evening, as we sat together in the schoolroom, I had not by word or hint alluded to the interruption of our lessons. My thoughts were of a very different order. Yes, in a way. My smile, I think, was faint, but not entirely. It would be unpleasant to be completely alone. I continued, yes, perhaps it would. Of course, we have others. We have others, true. We do have others, I agreed. And yet, though we have them, he objected, still with his hands in his pockets and standing before me, they don't count for very much, do they? I did not let on that my strength was failing. That depends on what you mean by very much. Yes, he readily took it up. Everything depends on that. Then he turned to the window again and approached it with quick, nervous steps. He stood for a while, pressing his forehead to the glass, gazing out at the absurd shrubs and the dreary October day, so familiar to me. I always had some work at hand for appearance's sake, and under that hypocritical pretext, I went and sat on the sofa. Soothing myself with this occupation, as I had often done in those agonizing moments I have already recounted, when I knew the children were absorbed in something to which I had no access, I gradually returned to my habitual state, a readiness for anything for the very worst. And suddenly something unusual came over me. Looking at the boy's back, I felt that he was troubled and that access to him was now open to me. This sensation grew stronger for several minutes, and I suddenly understood it was linked to the fact that access to something else was now closed to him. The frames and panes of the huge window were like a picture, and in this picture something was missing for him, whether he was within the picture or outside it. In any case, I could see him. He was somewhat perplexed, but still just as charming, and hope stirred within me. Was he not searching through this bewitching glass for something invisible to him, and for the first time experiencing such a disappointment? The first time, I took this as a happy omen. It visibly unsettled him, though he bore up. He had been in a state of anxiety all day, and even while sitting at the table, maintaining his usual polite and easy manner, he had had to summon his uncommon gift to preserve that ease. And when he turned to me, it seemed he had lost that gift. Well, I suppose I'm glad that bligh isn't harmful to me. You seem to have seen so much of it in the last 24 hours, more than ever before. I hope it has been agreeable to you. I ventured bravely. Oh yes, I wandered very far, went all around, many miles from the house. I have never felt so free. He spoke in his usual tone, and I merely strove to match it. And that was agreeable to you? And to you? He stood before me, smiling, and when he uttered those two words, there was as much discernment in them as I had ever heard in so brief a phrase. Before I could answer him, I heard him continue, as if feeling it was a boldness that needed softening. You show so prettily your attitude towards it. Yet since we've been left alone, you have to spend more time in complete solitude. But I don't suppose it troubles you very much, he added, that I see so little of you. I asked, my dear boy, how could it not trouble me? Although I have renounced all claims on your company, you have so distanced yourself from me. Still, it is very agreeable to me. And for what else would I have stayed? He looked me straight in the eye, and on his saddened face appeared an expression I had never seen before. You stayed only for that? Certainly. I am here as your friend, and because I take a great interest in you, and I shall stay until something suitable is found for you. You needn't be surprised. My voice faltered, and I felt I could not control its tremor. Don't you remember how I told you that night of the thunderstorm, when I came and sat on your bed, that there is nothing in the world I wouldn't do for you? Yes, yes. He too, it seemed, was moved and strove to master his voice. But he succeeded far better than I. The sadness that had shown on his face gave way to a smile, and, laughing thus, he pretended we were engaged in a merry jest. And I thought you said that so I would do something for you. Partly for that, I agreed. I wanted you to do something for me. But you know you have done nothing. Oh yes, you wanted me to tell you something, he answered with feigned readiness. Precisely. Well, tell me now. Whatever is in your heart, you know yourself. Ah, so that's why you've stayed? He spoke cheerfully, but through this cheerfulness there quivered a tremor of rising indignation. I cannot express what I felt, catching in this the faintest sign that he was yielding. It seemed that what I had so painfully striven for was about to be accomplished, and I was only astonished. Why, yes, I can honestly confess to you for that. He was silent for so long that I thought he was wondering whether there might be something else that could have made me stay, and at last he said, You want it here now? The most fitting time and place, none better could be chosen. He looked around distractedly, and I had a strange, oh, how strange, impression that for the first time I was detecting in him signs of a fear that was about to take hold of him. It was as if he had suddenly become afraid of me, and it occurred to me that perhaps this would be the best thing after all, to make him afraid. But however much I tried to assume severity, all efforts were in vain, and the next moment I heard my own voice, soft and almost ridiculously meek. You're eager to go out again? Yes, dreadfully. He smiled at me heroically, and this childish courage was all the more touching for the painful effort that made him flush. He grabbed the hat he had brought with him and stood turning it in his hands with such an air that I, having nearly reached my goal, felt an inexpressible horror at what I was doing. However I might obtain a confession, it would be a cruel violation of this small, helpless being who had opened up the possibility of such beautiful communion, for it meant instilling in him a sense of coarseness and guilt. Was it not base to implant in this charming creature such an uncharacteristic constraint? It seems I am now bringing a clarity to our relations that could not have existed at the time, for it appears that before our poor eyes a spark of foresight into the coming agony had already flashed, and we circled one another with agonizing doubts, with fear, like fighters who dare not close in. Yet we feared for each other. We waited, and for a while longer remained unharmed. "I'll tell you everything," said Miles. "I mean everything you want. You'll stay with me, and we'll both be all right. And I want to tell you myself, yes, I do. But not now." "Why not now?" My persistence made Miles recoil. He went back to the window and stood in silence, and in the ensuing quiet one could almost hear a fly pass. Then he turned to me with a look as if someone were waiting for him out there, someone with whom he evidently had to reckon. "I must go see Luke." Never before had I driven him to such a crude lie, and I felt more ashamed than ever. But his lie, terrible as it was, allowed me to uncover the truth. I carefully knitted a few more stitches in my work. "Very well. Go see Luke, and I shall wait for what you promised. Only, before you go, grant me one small request." He seemed to think the advantage was now on his side, and that he could still bargain with me. "Quite small. Yes, a tiny part of the whole." "Tell me." Oh, I was completely absorbed in my work, and spoke in such an offhand tone. "Was it you who took my letter from the hall table yesterday afternoon?" The boy's instantaneous reaction caught me off guard. All my attention was divided. I cannot call it otherwise. I sprang to my feet and, obeying an involuntary impulse, seized Miles, pressed him to me, and, leaning on the nearby furniture, instinctively turned him with his back to the window. Before us the apparition I had encountered here before had reappeared. Peter Quint stood before the window like a sentry at a prison grating. I saw him draw near from the depths of the garden, press against the glass, and stare through it, showing us once more his pale, eternally accursed face. To say my resolve was formed in an instant is but a crude way of describing what took place within me at that moment. Yet I think no woman, under such a powerful shock, could have moved to action in so brief a time. The thought came to me, despite my horror at the suddenly appeared vision, that whatever I might face, whatever I might see, the boy must suspect nothing. I was seized by an inspiration. There is no other word for it, for though gripped by fear, I acted decisively and swiftly. Thus does one fight a demon for a human soul. And understanding this, I saw the dew of perspiration break out on the lovely childish forehead held in my trembling hands. The face so close to mine seemed now as pale as the one outside, and from the child's lips came a voice, not soft, not weak, but sounding as if from a distance, which I drank in like a fleeting fragrance. Yes, I took it. Then, with a triumphant groan, I pressed the boy to my breast, feeling the desperate tremor in that small, feverish body. I kept my eyes fixed on the apparition outside the window and saw it shift, changing its stance. I had compared it to a sentry, but as it slowly turned, it rather resembled a beast slinking away, its prey having escaped. Yet the courage that had flared up in me now had to be dampened, like a flame, so as not to betray itself. Meanwhile, the ghost stared into the window again with a heavy, immovable gaze, ready to watch and wait as long as needed. The knowledge that I was now strong enough to fight it, and the certainty that the boy did not see it, allowed me to continue. "Why did you take the letter?" "To see what you had written about me." "You opened it?" "Yes, I opened it." My eyes now looked straight into Miles's face. I held him slightly away from me, and the complete absence of mockery in his gaze showed he was worn out with anxiety. Most astonishing was that his perception, thanks to my victory, seemed blunted, and all connection with the apparition was broken. He felt some presence, but knew not whose, and even less did he suspect that I too saw everything and had long known everything. And what did this impending calamity signify now? When I looked at the window and saw the air was clear again, and victory, victory, that influence was destroyed. There was nothing outside the window. I felt I had won the battle and would finally learn everything. And you found nothing there. I gave free rein to my exultation. He shook his head sadly, pensively. "Nothing, nothing, nothing." I almost shouted with joy. "Nothing, nothing," he repeated mournfully. I kissed him on the forehead. It was damp with sweat. "So what did you do with the letter?" "I burned it." "Burned it? Now or never?" "Did you do such things at school too?" "Oh, what followed then?" "At school. Did you take letters there? Or other things?" "Other things." He seemed now to be thinking of something distant, and my words reached him only under the weight of anxiety. But they did reach him. "You mean, did I steal?" I flushed to the roots of my hair, while at the same time asking myself which was stranger, to put such a question to a gentleman, or to see him accept it, acknowledging the depth of his fall. "And that's why you can't go back?" The only thing that flickered in his gaze was a joyless astonishment. "Did you know I couldn't go back?" "I know everything." Here he looked at me for a long, very strange moment. "Everything, everything. So you didn't—" Still, I could not repeat the word. But he could, and very simply. "No, I didn't steal." My face must have shown that I believed him unconditionally, but my hands shook him, though tenderly, as if asking why he had condemned me to long months of agony if it had all been for nothing. "What did you do then?" In vague anguish, he cast his eyes about the ceiling and sighed 2 or 3 times, visibly with considerable effort. He seemed to be standing at the bottom of the sea and lifting his eyes to some twilight green light. "Well, I said things. Only that. They decided that was enough. To expel you? Truly, no exile ever gave so little account of his banishment as this little person." He seemed to consider my question, but in a completely abstracted, almost helpless way. "Well, I suppose I shouldn't have said them. But to whom did you say them?" He evidently tried to recall, but his memory retained nothing. He had forgotten. "I can't remember." He was almost smiling, surrendering to the victor's mercy, and indeed, his defeat was so complete that I ought to have stopped there. But I was intoxicated, blinded by victory, though even at that moment the very thing that should have brought us closer was beginning to widen the gulf between us. "Perhaps to everyone at school?" I asked. "No, only to those." But here he gave a painful shake of his head. "I can't remember their names." "Were there so many?" "No, very few. Those I was friends with." "Those he was friends with?" It seemed I was sailing not toward light, but in an even deeper darkness. And a minute later, beneath the pity in me, a terrible anxiety arose. What if he was guilty of nothing? For a moment, a dizzying abyss opened before me. For if he was not guilty, then what was I? While this lasted, I was as if paralyzed by this fleeting thought alone and loosened my grip slightly. And the boy, drawing a deep breath, turned away from me again, and I bore it, knowing that beyond the clear glass he was gazing at, there was nothing more, and there was no one to guard him from. "And did they tell others what they heard from you?" I asked after a moment. He moved away from me, still breathing heavily and with an expression as if he were being forcibly detained, but he was no longer angry about it. And again he looked out the window at the gloomy day, as if nothing remained of what had sustained him but inexpressible melancholy and anxiety. "Yes," he answered nonetheless. "Probably they told," and added, "those they were friends with themselves. For some reason, I had hoped for more, but nevertheless I pondered his words." "And that reached the teachers?" "Oh, yes," he answered very simply. "But I didn't know they would tell." "The teachers? They didn't tell, they told nothing. That's why I'm asking you." He turned his beautiful, agitated face to me again. "Yes, it's a great pity. A pity. I shouldn't have spoken. And why write home about it? I cannot express how touchingly charming the contrast was between such words and the one who uttered them. I only know that the next moment I exclaimed from the heart, 'What nonsense!' But a moment later, my voice sounded, I suppose, sufficiently severe. 'What did you tell about?' All my severity was directed at his judge, his executioner, yet my tone made him turn away again, and this movement of his prompted me to leap toward him with an irrepressible cry and clasp him in my arms. For there, beyond the glass, had appeared again, as if to cancel his confession and cut off his answer, the vile author of our woe, the pale, eternally accursed face. I was sickened that my victory had been snatched away, and I must fight again, and my frantic leap only gave me away completely. I saw that this impulse had led him to a guess, but noticing that even now he only guessed, and that, to his eyes, the space beyond the window remained empty, I let this impulse flare into bright flame and turn the extremity of his bewilderment into a sure sign of relief from anxiety. "Never again, never, never!" I cried to that apparition and clasped the boy even tighter. "Is she here?" gasped Miles, catching even with closed eyes to whom my words were directed. And then, struck by a strange I echoed breathlessly, "She, Miss Jessel, Miss Jessel," he answered me with sudden fury. Stunned, I still understood that his error was somehow connected with Flora's absence, and I wanted to prove to him it was not so. "It is not Miss Jessel, but it is at the window, right before us. It is there, the cowardly, vile phantom. For the last time it is there." And then a second later, tossing his head like a dog losing his scent, he frantically strained toward the air and light. Then, beside himself with rage, flung himself upon me, bewildered, gazing around in vain, and seeing nothing, though to me it seemed that now this all-crushing, all-penetrating vision filled the room like spilled poison. "Is it he?" I had so firmly resolved to challenge Miles that I instantly changed my tone to an icy one, demanding his answer. "Who is he?" "Peter Quint, the damned." His face showed feverish excitement and supplication. He swept the room with his gaze. "Where is he?" In my ears to this day sounds that name, wrung from him in the final minute, and the tribute he paid to my devotion. "My dear, what can he signify now? What can he ever signify? You are mine." I threw at the monster, "and he has lost you forever." And I cried out so Miles would know what I had achieved. "There he is. There." But he had already darted to the window, stared, his eyes flashed again, and saw nothing but the quiet day. Stricken by that loss of which I was so proud, he uttered a cry as if he had been hurled into an abyss, and I clasped him tighter, as if catching him in mid-air. Yes, I caught and held him. One can imagine with what love, but a minute later I felt what the thing I held in my arms had become. We were left alone with a quiet day, and his little heart, emptied, stopped. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Share your impressions and thoughts in the comments. I'll be happy to chat with you.